Good evening, everyone. Welcome to At Home with the League. I am Joanna Leifer. I'm the Program Committee Chair for the League of Women Voters New York City chapter. This is our fourth Zoom program that we started this spring due to COVID-19. Every month, the Program Committee develops a speaker program on an important topic influencing New Yorkers. Tonight, we have a panel of experts who will discuss the intricacies of voting in the year of COVID. They will discuss the voting options that are available and how to go about successfully using each of these options. But before we begin our program, we have a few announcements. First, this Zoom program is being taped. So if you do not want to appear on the tape, please sign off now. Next, be aware that except for the speakers, everyone is muted. This reduces ambient noise and any interruptions that could be distracting. We will have 2 Q&A periods, one after each segment of this presentation. Please write your questions below in the chat function, and one of our members will read them out to be answered. The third point is we've added a new segment to this program. Many of you have asked if there is a way to linger after the program to discuss ideas regarding the topic and asking additional questions. So we heard you. Anyone who wants to leave after the presentation may, and those who wish to talk, exchange ideas, or ask questions of the panelists can do this for an additional 10 to 15 minutes. Now, I want to introduce our Zoom whiz, the woman who actually keeps us going, and that is Leslie Siegel, who is also a co-president of the New York City League. Leslie is working behind the scenes to ensure this Zoom program functions properly. I am now going to ask her to introduce herself and to give you a little more information on the League and some of its current activities. Leslie.
Thank you so much, Joanna. It's great to be here, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for, is it our 5th or 6th At Home with the League program? I think they've been going fantastically, and it's such a great thing that we've been doing during the pandemic, and we appreciate every one of you who joins us for these. So I think most of you are pretty familiar with us. For those of you who are not, the League of Women Voters of the City of New York is a 101-year-old organization. We focus very heavily on inspiring all New Yorkers to engage civically and to make sure their voices are heard. We are very active, of course, in voting rights. And I will say, even with the pandemic, we still held in-person voter registration events. We did almost all of them outdoors to, maintain safety, but we did at least 85 in-person events between August and October 9th. We reached over 5,000 people, and I don't remember exactly how many people we registered, but we had a really good rate. So I think that was a fantastic thing that we were still able to do during the pandemic. We also did our first ever voting clinics, which were online opportunities for people to come in, join us, ask us questions, and go into breakout rooms if they needed help filling out a form. I, for example, helped a woman update her voter registration because she had moved. She'd moved out of New York City, and I helped her to update her voter registration address virtually. So she went online, I walked her through it, and it was a really good thing, something I think we'll continue to do even when we can be back in person again. We have some very exciting things coming up. So tomorrow is actually our education committee meeting. So for those of you who are interested in civics education and how we reach out to, the younger voters and even people who are not quite old enough to vote, but we can still pre-register, and even younger than that, to help get them, engaged civically, that is a great committee for you to join. Next week, we have 2 committee meetings. We've got on the 21st at 6 p.m. Sorry, the education committee is tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. So next Wednesday, the 21st at 6 p.m., we have our Voter Services Committee, and they are the people who make all the magic happen when it comes to our voter registration events and our Get Out the Vote events. And then next Thursday at 6:30 p.m., we have our Housing Justice Committee. That is a new committee. This will be its third meeting. It's a committee still kind of discussing exactly what it wants to focus on, but everything that we'll focus on relates to housing issues within the city of New York. And of course, early voting starts a week from this Sunday, the 24th. It's hard to believe yeah, it's less than 2 weeks away. So of course, we urge you all to get out and vote. And Election Day is literally 3 weeks from today on November 3rd. So our panel will be talking quite a bit about your options this year. So I won't go further into it in that. The only other thing I'd like to say is if you're not currently a member of the League of Women Voters, first of all, we still thank you for joining this, but your membership will help us continue to run programs like this, but more than that, it will actually help you engage your community. Because, you know, being a member of the League of Women Voters, there's a lot of tools that you'll have access to, trainings, you'll get information on all our trainings, right? That will help you answer questions or know how to talk to your friends and your family about why it's important to vote, why it's important to engage civically, you know, talk to your legislators. You know, next year, we're all focused this year on the presidential election, but there's congressional and state elections as well. And next year is a big election for the city of New York, right? The mayor and the city council are up. So we can't lose our momentum, right? We have to carry it over into the local elections as well, the state elections, the local elections. And we're introducing ranked choice voting next year. That's going to be new for the city of New York. It will only be in the primary, but it's new. And, you know, we need to help people understand how that's going to work. So I encourage all of you to join, help your communities. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Joanna.
Thank you, Leslie. Now we're going to come to the main feature of this program, voting in the year of COVID-19. We have 3 expert league members who devote a good bit of their time following voting issues and ensuring that our citizens are able to vote. Our 3 panelists are all from the State League. First, we have Suzanne Stadovich, who will lead the panel. She is the president of the New York State League Board of Directors. She openly admits that voting services is her first love. She originally joined the league when living in California, where she became their first vice president of voter services and participated in a statewide education campaign supporting applications and processes. Then she moved to New York City in 2013, and we're glad she's here. Suzanne fulfilled her ambition to work as one of the League of Women Voters from the US as an observer at the UN. Her focus at the UN was on education and outreach to League members nationwide with a Think Global, Act Locally program. Next, we have Jennifer Wilson. Jennifer, wave Jennifer. Jennifer is the Deputy Director for the League of Women Voters for New York State. She serves as the in-house lobbyist and policy advisor. Before coming to the League, she worked as the Deputy Regional Director for the Albany office of Senator Chuck Schumer, an important position. In 2017, she was recognized in City and State's 40 Under 40 Rising Stars in Albany. And then we have Kate Doran, who was a board member of the New York City League from 2010. Did you wave? I'm sorry.
I did, I waved.
Thank you. From 2010 to 2018. Currently, Kate is the off-board election specialist and is a member of the Voters Services Committee. She closely monitors the New York City Board of Elections and attends their weekly meetings, so nothing gets by. and she reports everything to the league members and various policy groups. Kate became an election day poll worker in 2004, and from 2006 through 2016, Kate was a poll site coordinator. So as you can see, we have three very experts. So now I'm going to turn the meeting over to them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanna, and good evening, everyone. Leslie, if we could have the first slide. This is 3 ways you can vote. That's where we are. And it's a long way, actually, from where we were 2 years ago, or even 4 years ago, when there were a lot more limitations, but we also didn't have a pandemic to worry about. But we do have, all of you still have 3 ways you can vote. You can still apply for an absentee. You can vote early. You can drop your absentee off at an early polling site, or you can vote on the day of election. And we're going to break up our conversation into those 3 categories and give you an idea of what's going on, how we got there, and how safe and easy it is for you to get on. The first thing we want to really dive into, because it's the biggest change we've had, is the change in absentee voting. And I'm going to turn to Jennifer to talk about how people can get their ballots and what these changes are, because they are quite significant for the state of New York, where we have had very, very tightly controlled and limited access to absentee ballots. Jennifer.
Great. Thanks, Suzanne. Hey, everybody. I was scrolling through the participants. I noticed we have a fair amount of people on, actually not from New York City, so that's awesome. We definitely will be focusing mostly on New York City, but I will try and incorporate some of the other parts of the state too. So there have definitely been a lot of changes related to absentee voting that started during the primary election back when the pandemic was really getting started in March, and we saw a lot of changes then. And most of those changes have carried forward for the general election. Then we've had even more changes and enhancements to absentee voting. So here in New York State, in order to vote by mail, not in the traditional sense of vote by mail, but to have a mail ballot, what we call absentee voting, you have to have a reason for requesting an absentee ballot, a mail-in ballot. So in New York State, those reasons are really limited. As part of our state constitution, the actual reasons to request a ballot. So this year, they did expand the reason of temporary illness to include fear of contracting COVID-19. That law does sunset in 2022, and hopefully by then it will not be a problem anymore. We won't have to worry about that. So anyone in New York State can request an absentee ballot by marking temporary illness, and they also expanded the ways that you can request an absentee ballot. So in the past, you would have to send either by mail or by fax, or go in person to your county board of elections and hand it in a form where you would mark your reason and you would sign, and you would have to put what they call a wet signature, where pen hits paper and you are signing and saying, I want an absentee ballot. But now you can apply by phone, you can apply online or by email, and there is a lot more opportunity to actually get your absentee ballot request in than just sending it in by mail or fax. So in New York City, there is an awesome portal, and there is also now a statewide portal as well. So it's very, very easy to request your ballot and make sure that the Board of Elections has you in their system and can easily send you a ballot. And there is some other changes as well related to the actual counting of absentee ballots, but I think we're going to talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. The next step in that process is, once you've gone to one of the portals or called or written to get an absentee ballot, then you have to fill it out. And Kate's going to take you through the rest of the process. And starting by saying, a lot of this information you can get on Vote 411.
That's correct. And I have to say also that the New York City Board of Elections website, which is vote.nyc is much more voter friendly than it ever has been. And all of us in the voter coalitions and the activists can take credit for that. So I learned just this week that they have videos up on their website going step by step through the process of filling out your absentee ballot. So the most important components of that are to make sure that you fill the color in the ovals the way you would if you were voting in person on election day, to insert your ballot into the oath envelope, nothing else, just the ballot, no stray marks on the ballot, just the marks, just as though you were voting in person on election day. Fill out that ballot in the same way, insert it into the oath envelope, and then sign and date the oath envelope. It's a much better envelope than it used to be. It's got a big red X in New York City that tells you exactly where it is that you're meant to sign. And that's pretty much the only fatal error you could make in filling out your absentee ballot, is failing to sign it. But thanks to the League of Women Voters and a judge's decision, there is the cure process in place, so that if you fail to sign your ballot or you forget something else, the Board of Elections is obligated to contact you and allow you to correct that mistake. And this is huge, and we are really, really grateful, because that was a very simple way to invalidate a ballot, is to toss it aside because there was no signature. So that's all I want to say about that right now, and we'll be taking questions, I think, a little bit later.
And Jennifer, if you could elaborate a little bit more about the curing the ballot, what that means, and all the different ways that was accomplished with the lawsuit, because the legislature did address it, but not in the detail and not as heavily as we did in the lawsuit. No, we're not. Jennifer, we're not hearing you.
Oh, sorry about that. I have phone audio going. Yeah, so yes, thank you, Kate, for the sort of intro to this, and thanks, Suzanne, for talking about the lawsuit. So yes, right after the primary, we partnered with the U.S. League to launch a lawsuit against the State Board of Elections, essentially saying that the process we have for vetting absentee ballots right now is really unfair. So in the past in New York State, if your absentee ballot was challenged for any reason and disqualified, or even if it was challenged but not disqualified, you never heard about it. So if there was an issue with your signature, if you marked outside of the designated area, if you filled out your ballot in red pen instead of black or blue, or used pencil, if you sealed either of your envelopes with tape instead of licking them shut, those were all reasons your absentee ballot could get thrown out, and you would never know about it. You would never know that your vote was not counted. So the League partnered with US to launch a lawsuit that was mainly about the signature issue, because voters with disabilities, voters who are maybe elderly and their signature has changed a lot over time, these voters, their signature might not look the same as it would in the poll book, even though it's their same signature, because their handwriting has changed over time. And we actually had a plaintiff on the suit with us who was a voter with disabilities who had hand tremors and said, I want to vote by absentee. I'm in the high risk population, but I'm really afraid my ballot's going to be thrown out because my signature is not going to look like how it looks in the poll book. So we were successful in that suit. We settled the lawsuit, and although the legislature had already put something on the books that was signed by the governor, they passed a law that basically said if there's an issue with the signature, voters can be notified and be able to address it. Our settlement also threw out all that archaic language about marking outside the lines, using the wrong color ink, sealing with tape. So now you can seal with tape. You can seal your affirmation envelope with a sticker if you want. As long as it's sealed, they will accept it. And if there is an issue with your signature or your witness signature, or if you didn't seal completely shut and it opened when they received it, you will be notified and you'll be able to address that issue. And the actual specifics of it is that the Board of Election, within 48 hours of receipt of your absentee ballot, they have to open the outer envelope, the return envelope, to look at the affirmation envelope, look at your signature, compare it to what's in the poll book, make sure it's sealed, and if not, they have to contact you either by phone, email, or mail, whichever option is most expedient. And then you, the voter, have 5 days to respond to that outreach to basically affirm that you are who you say you are. The Board of Elections will give you really specific directions of what to do, how to sign. You can either sign wet signature, pen to paper, or electronically, depending on how you applied to vote absentee in the first place. That's when we get really into the weeds. But overall, it's our hope that there'll be way less challenges to begin with, since we are limiting what can be challenged to just issues with signature, whether it's witness or your own signature, and issues with the sealing of the envelope. So if your envelope is completely unsealed, you'll be notified. So overall, it was a great win, and it's a lot of new information. It's a lot of new procedures for boards of elections to do this time around. And one other thing that I just want to mention before we sort of close on absentee voting is the Dropbox issue, or not issue, the Dropbox success, if anything. So the governor issued an executive order mandating that all county boards of elections come up with plans to have drop boxes at all early voting and election day poll sites. And part of that plan was to make sure that no one had to wait in a line that was for regular voters. So every single poll site for early voting and election day will have a drop box, will have a designated area where you can go to drop off your absentee ballot, so you don't have to wait in the regular line. There'll be appropriate signage everywhere, so you'll know where to go, and you'll be able to do something you haven't been able to do in the past necessarily, which is to drop off your ballot in an actual box. So some counties might not have actual boxes. It might be a bag or a folder or something else, but there will be a designated area. You could always technically drop off your ballot before this executive order, but this just makes it a little bit cleaner, where you don't have to worry about waiting in lines, and you don't have to worry about going up to a poll worker and the poll worker saying, I'm not sure that you can drop off a ballot here.
Right.
That's a huge win. And something even bigger with that for New York City in particular is New York City voters can drop it off in any borough at any site. So if you're a Brooklyn voter, you can drop it off in Manhattan if that's where you work. So it's a really great policy. We've had a lot of changes this year. I know I talk very fast, so happy to answer questions in the chat too after this.
We also should address the postage question, Jennifer. I noticed there was I got an alert from the State Board of Election Office that the post office will deliver all of the ballots that come in, whether they have the right amount of postage or not. Now, my understanding is that they back charge the county if there's not, but that's a discussion they can have with the county.
Right.
And do you have any follow-up on that for New York City especially? Kate, has that been an issue? Because we know the ballots are different in each
No,
borough.
it's a tremendous relief, because it's been a top of the priority question for weeks now, and we're still advising voters to probably put 2 forever stamps on it if they live in Queens. Most other places can get by with 1 stamp. But, the worry, of course, is that the post office is a big bureaucracy, similar to the Board of Elections, and, maybe the rules won't filter down to the rank and file. So we know what the rule is, that the post office is absolutely required to deliver and charge back the cost to the Board of Elections if they don't think they've gotten enough postage. But you should be able to put a stamp on your election day material and send it off to the post office and have it delivered. If it comes back to you, we want to know about that instantly, because that's a problem.
It is. So now I think we can take questions about absentee ballots. And the first one that came up was from Joanne Pugh. If I submit my absentee ballot at the early voting site, will it get counted as an early ballot or as an absentee ballot? I want my vote counted as early as possible.
Well, it will be counted along with all the other absentee ballots. It's not early voting is in-person voting. You stand at a privacy booth and you fill out your ballot, and then you slide the ballot into a scanner. Absentee voting is not in-person voting, and it's the ballots are not counted until after Election Day.
So that leads into the second question, which was, when do they start counting absentee ballots, which is after Election Day? And is it the day after or 2 days after, or when do they start, Kate?
Well, what we've been told is they could conceivably start sooner, but in New York City, they start 7 days after. They're going to open those outer envelopes, as Jennifer mentioned, because they're going to have to notify a voter if there's something that needs to be cured, but they're not going to open the inner oath envelopes and begin counting until 7 days after. And part of the reason is I think this is a very high information crowd here, but in New York State, the law permits a voter to vote by absentee, that is, fill out an absentee ballot and mail it in, and then also show up to vote in person, because the theory is that you anticipated being out of the county and unable to vote, and you found that you were around and you could vote, so that you show up on Election Day or at an early voting site, and then the Board of Elections will discount, they will invalidate your absentee ballot. So it takes time to do that. They have to get the voter rolls, the registration books back. In this case, nowadays, it's the e-poll books, but they have to get the records back, not only from the counties, but from the state, because someone could have voted in person in any other place in the state. That all takes time. So they have to do all that before they can begin to count the valid absentee ballots.
Okay, the next question is, how will the Board of Elections know the voter's email address or phone number to inform the voter of a disqualification of an absentee ballot?
Yeah, and so this is something we were concerned about with this settlement, is that you have to be the one to tell them. So it's optional on registration forms and also on absentee ballot requests to include your email and phone number. So what we're telling voters is, if they don't think they have their correct or up-to-date phone number or email address on file right now, to reach out to the Board of Elections if they are planning on voting absentee, to make sure that they have the correct information, because mail is their absolute last resort. So even if they have a bad email or phone number for you on file, if they're not getting that kickback of this number is out of service or this email no longer exists, they're not going to take the extra steps to go out of their way to try and contact you.
Okay, I think that's the questions we have for now. If I come to the next slide, please, Leslie. Another way the League is trying to keep everybody informed is with a texting service, but you have to sign up. You text Vote New York to 474747. Now, we're not going to bombard you with texts. It's coming out of the state, but it's going across the state. It's just mainly to give you reminders. And I'll tell you, last spring, we went live in March, and we didn't think we were going to be using it, that much. Except the law kept changing, and the executive orders started flowing with the pandemic. And we ended up, it was a great tool because so many changes kept coming down the pike that voters needed to know about before the June primary. And we've had the same thing happen lately. So if you would like a reminder about when early voting starts, if you'd like a reminder about the last day to apply for an absentee ballot, that's the kind of information that we're putting out on Text New York, on our texting service for voters. So there's the information, and I encourage you to use it if you like getting text information. Our next slide, please, Leslie. Early voting. Early voting came about in a not very well attended election in November 19 when it was first used. And we have since realized that a lot of people, especially in New York City, had no idea about early voting. And in your voter information pamphlet that you should have all gotten from the Board of Elections in New York City now, that's what it looks like, the slide. It also has your voter card. Inside there is your early voting site and your November 3rd election day polling site, and lots of information about how to access your ballot. Next slide. And along with this and your voter card, which has your voter ID number on it, is this little fob you can put on your keychain too. So when you're going to early vote or voting on election day, this is a contactless way to sign in to the poll sites. You bring your fob, they'll scan the barcode, and you don't have to touch iPads or pens or pencils or anything. And you can check in with your fob or with your voting card, which also has your barcode on it. Early voting, Jen, you want to take a stab at this, at how it's going across the state, because it's different in New York City and the state.
Yeah, okay, I'm not muted. Okay, yeah, so yeah, New York City is definitely the most different in terms of early voting compared to upstate and Westchester and the other counties. It's right now, I believe, the only area that's actually assigning poll sites. So when you are looking to go vote early in New York City, you definitely want to use the voter lookup tool, which I believe Leslie dropped in the chat, and I have it handy too. It's findmypollsite.vote.nyc. So before you go to vote early, make sure you check there to see what the poll sites are. The days are the same for everyone. So we're starting October 24th. We're going to end on November 1st. But the hours, the sites, all that is different depending on what county you live in and what borough you live in. And we also have on the State League website, lwv.ny.org, or lwvnys.org. Sorry, I'm getting all my URLs confused today. We have a grid of all of the counties in New York State where you can click and see all of the poll sites for each of the counties. Except for New York City, we just linked the poll site locator because that's the easiest. But if you're not in New York City and you want to see what sites you have in your county, you can check there. We also have extra information about accessibility on there too. So whether the site has parking, whether or not it's been deemed ADA handicap accessible, which pretty much all of them have been because they have to be. And if they're on a public transit line and what that public transit option is, all that information is on our website as well. So if you want more information about parking or that kind of stuff, check out lwvnys.org.
Great, thanks, Jen. Yeah, and going back to the voter information pamphlet you got with your voter card in New York City should list your polling site, and it does list the hours of your polling site in New York City in that form. And you should, I hope everybody got it, and if you didn't, we should help you get in touch with the Board of Elections to make sure you do get it.
I absolutely did get it, and I have it in front of me, and I'm starting on October 24th to walk down to my polling station every day till I can get in.
That's great.
Report to us and tell us what the crowds are like.
Well,
So
I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
Kate, you want to talk to a little bit about how things operate in New York City with poll site assignments and why we have to have our polling site assigned for early voting and nobody else in the counties do?
Right. I believe, Jennifer can confirm, but I believe this is the first, what they call election event, where New York City is the outlier. There were some other counties previously, but I believe New York City is the only Board of Elections in the state now that assigns voters to their early voting poll site. And, you know, they're not all that loyal to the concept of transparency, but I'm happy to tell you what they say about this. The reason they say they must assign voters is because they are required to have ballot marking devices, which are the device in the poll site. Wonderful, wonderful piece of machinery. And it accommodates all kinds of voters, anybody who has any conceivable handicap or disability. And I use it all the time. I like it. You can sit down in front of it. You don't have to stand up. And it marks your ballot beautifully. But it also, for people who are blind, it must have an audio file. I'm sure that certain people think about this, but anyone who can't see could have their ballot read to them, which means that the ballot marking device has to be loaded with every single possible ballot that could come across its way. So if you're at an early voting site that accommodates dozens and dozens of election districts, then you're going to have loaded in that ballot marking device the audio files for every single one of those election districts and every one of those contests. So at this moment in time, the New York City Board of Elections, their strongest argument for assigning early voting sites is they cannot possibly load all of those audio files onto the ballot marking devices such that they could permit anyone to go into any site within the county. Now, that's the reason that they give. And they also say that apart from the ballot marking device, the scanners have to be tested. Every single ballot has to be tested in the scanners. So of course you can imagine the more ballots that are in use, if you're going to allow anyone from any place in the county to vote at any early voting site, that would mean that all the possible ballots that could be scanned have to be tested in those scanners. So they claim at this point in time that the equipment and the time involved, they can't possibly do that to allow what they call county-wide early voting. So what we have is this system where they have 88 poll sites, early voting sites, which is quite a large number compared to what they did originally, but they are assigned. So you must check before you go out to vote early that you are going to the site that's assigned to you. But it's easy to find out. As Suzanne pointed out, it's on that annual voter notice. It'll tell you very clearly, and you can also check the poll site locator.
And just on top of that, they're also accommodating translations, although it's not going to be available every day for different languages. We have so many languages that are being accommodated now in New York City. I think it's up to 11. Is that correct, Kate?
Well, the Federal Voting Rights Act has 5 covered languages, which the Board of Elections supports, but the City Council has said through the Civic Engagement Commission that they're going to provide translators for an additional number. And it's a large number. I don't know what it is, but they will be there on the last 2 days of early voting with interpreter support for languages other than those 5.
Yeah, and it's just the last two days. But I think it's a great step forward for the city. The next thing we wanted to talk about is making a plan. Have you all made a plan to vote? Leslie, could I have the next slide, please? Do you know, have you decided when you're going to vote? Where you're going to vote, how you're going to get there? I've heard complaints from other people, friends of mine, that, oh, I'm not going to vote early, it's too far away. And that was particularly hard to hear when she was 85 years old, and I really, really want her to vote safely. But what we might have now, and we all hope we have, is a large turnout for this election using all these 3 different ways in New York that you can vote. But if you would like to show up at the polls, if you feel like that would be safe for you, because the polls are required to have social distancing, you're required to wear masks at any Board of Elections site, which includes all the poll sites. There's bring your hand sanitizer and get ready to stand in line. And you'll be there with your neighbors in your community, and bring your patients, because everything's going to take a little bit longer. Haven't you noticed everything takes a little bit longer with social distancing and no crowding in the markets? And so you got to bring your patients, bring your fast pass. That'll take that. Bring your barcoded pass, and that'll get you right in there. Think about all your choices before you go. Bring your water, bring some snacks, bring a cell phone fully charged, bring your umbrella. It's good for the sun, it's good for the rain. Wear a mask, wear comfortable shoes, layer your clothes so you won't get too hot or too cold. But do prepare. They're going to be long, but you know, this is your community, and voting has always been a social activity in this country where communities get together to support our democracy. So it's just going to be a little slower and a little longer this time, because you know, turnout for presidential elections is always the greatest. But we have all of our assembly, all of our legislature, and many other communities have lots of local offices on the ballot too. So it's important that everybody show up, and that we encourage that. Kate, are you aware of any of the special procedures the BOE is taking, acknowledging the dangers that we face with COVID?
I can tell you that they have, they're providing masks, of course, for all the poll workers. They will have boxes of masks for any voter who comes in and needs one. They have hand sanitizer available. There is going to be plexiglass screens in front of the poll worker who sits at the election district table. They worked hard to create that fast pass, as Suzanne described, so that you won't have to touch anything. And they're also going to give every voter, they're calling it a souvenir of voting. They're going to give you a pen, which will be the stylus that you will use to sign on the electronic poll book. And then you turn it over endwise, and it's going to be the pen you can use to mark your ballot. And it's yours to keep, so you won't have to share it. You won't have to worry about sanitizing it, and the poll workers won't have to sanitize the stylus that the voters are using. They're going to try very hard to keep people 6 feet distanced in the lines. I don't know how that's going to work. There were not enormous lines in at the primary in 2020. They tell us that they're going to have a line for people who plan to come into the poll site and vote in person, and they'll have another line, let's hope much shorter and moving much more quickly for those people who just want to drop off their absentee ballots. So I hope no one will get into any arguments with anybody at a poll site about mask wearing, but the truth is that the Board of Elections and all of us can encourage mask wearing, but it's not something that can be used to disenfranchise a voter. If a voter really insists that they're not going to wear a mask, we can't send them away and say, okay, you can't vote. It's not like wearing a button saying vote for me, or electioneering, handing out election-related material. A mask is not, we can't send people away because they refuse to wear a mask. So we hope that anyone who's standing in a line can be patient and figure out a way to make themselves feel safe from somebody who might not want to wear a mask.
Is that true in the polling site also?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the poll workers are required. They're employees, and they're going to be told, you must wear a mask and you must abide by all the rules that the CDC and that the board has imposed, but a voter who refuses to wear a mask cannot be sent out of the poll site.
Okay. We have we have more questions coming in, although Jennifer's doing a great job of keeping up and in the chat. But that not wearing a mask kind of segues into another subject that's been more and more on everybody's mind, and that is the threat of voter intimidation at the polls. So the first thing you need to know is your rights, which is none of that activity can happen within 100 feet of the polling site. But with long lines, that gets hard to manage. But we get into voter protection. We'll give you a hotline for that. But for us, the best thing to tell you is do not engage. They can't stop you to vote. They can be people can be unpleasant. Poll workers, someone should go in and notify the poll officers in the poll station that there is somebody intimidating people in the line, and let them solve the problem. Some of this is not your problem to solve, although it may be your problem in your face, so to speak. But it is only for you to inform somebody else that it's happening. Please don't engage, and encourage your friends and neighbors not to engage, just to use the phone numbers, or if there's a security person in the area, go and get them, and certainly notify the head of that polling site coordinator that something is going on outside that's intimidating voters. And that's the best advice we can give you at the moment. And for league members, there is a training coming up at the end of the month for bystander poll watcher. And we're happy to give you the information to attend that training if you would like to, and if you feel like you're going to be out and about on voting days and wouldn't mind wandering by different poll sites and reporting on anything unusual that's happening, or good news. Bystanders can also report good news. Poll watchers aren't only there to tell us what's wrong, they're also there to tell us what's going well. So let's take some more of the questions that we have. Can there be a rule that the election can't be called until all the votes are counted? Jennifer, I'll let you take that.
I mean, technically, that kind of is the case right now. I mean, I guess for the presidential election, we have to consider too that the Electoral College has to convene. So really, we can't call it until the Electoral College convenes and does their thing. But yeah, I don't have a good answer for this. I don't know if Kate has a has a better answer than me.
Well, you know, even after the Electoral College, the Congress has to accept the results of the Electoral College, and that doesn't happen until January 6th, 2021. And as far as calling the elections, you know, we have Canvass. The Canvass has to be completed, and that's the official count. And Kate, I don't know the date here, and it has to be before the Electoral College, which is the third Wednesday after the second Tuesday or something in December. It's some crazy formula.
Well, the New York City Board of Elections has promised to get the canvass complete, including the counting of all the absentee ballots. And I don't think that there is any time in history when they have not done so. So I'm confident.
That's great to hear. Let's see. If someone calls the league with complaints about harassment at the polls, what should the league volunteer do? Jennifer, you want to do the election protection?
Yeah, so there's two great hotlines. So the first is the lawyers committee's hotline, which is the really easy one to remember, the 866 Our Vote hotline, which is great for kind of general, anyone who's having an issue at a poll site. I think in the case of harassment, the Attorney General's hotline is probably the better option. And I don't know that hotline off the top of my head, but I will look it up and drop it in the chat, because the Attorney General for early voting and election day sets up their own hotline for more heavy duty complaints, if you will. So harassment, I think you could do even both hotlines to call them and just, you know, or even have the voter themselves if they want to give their own account to call the hotline. I keep seeing the seating question come up about if there's seats going to be available at poll sites for people who can't stand for long periods of time. And Kate, I think we've had this conversation before, and that's not usually the case, or if there is, it's only inside and not outside.
Well, in my experience at the poll site, regular, your neighbors, regular voters are very, very attentive to those people who can't stand and who are waiting in line. And I've seen, you know, really special, attentive accommodations. There are chairs in the poll sites, and I know I've offered chairs to people who are having trouble waiting on a line. And oftentimes the voters will say, "Oh, I'll let this voter go ahead of me." But we always can offer that voter a seat at the ballot marking device also. There's typically no line at the ballot marking device, and you don't have to stand as you would at a regular privacy booth. So it can be an issue, but I think we all need to be courteous and neighborly and help people out in the small way if we can. There's no rule about it. There's nothing in the poll worker manual about it.
The question also comes up about dropping off your ballot. And yes, there are drop boxes on the early election voting days, and on November 3rd, there's also a drop-off box. If you have any fears about that not being counted, or maybe your poll site won't put up a drop box and there won't be any place for you, you can either put it in the mail, which we advise you to do right now, as soon as you get your absentee ballot. If you don't want to go drop it off, put it in the mail tomorrow. Earlier the better. Same with early voting. Don't all run off the first day, but middle of the day or whenever you think that things might thin out, go vote during early voting. It would be great if more than 50% of New York City voters had voted before November 3rd. And let's see, I'm just trying to scan the questions here. Somebody said not wearing a mask is an assault on people who are older or disabled. And I agree with you, but not much we can do.
We're in uncharted waters here.
That's a good way to put it.
And I have to tell you, I did not work in June, but I did work, volunteered with election protection, and I went out to various poll sites, and I found that some of the worst offenders in terms of not wearing masks were the police officers. And I think all of us who live in New York City know that there's a police officer stationed at every single election day polling site, and they have a presence also at the early voting sites. And I certainly hope that they're going to be setting an example beginning on October 24th, because it's a difficult problem. We can only hope for the best and see what happens.
Yeah, and I think that it's the same. We all put our best forward and promote kindness and help people who let people who can't stand in line for long periods of time go to the front.
Right.
And I have found, personally, I find when I'm out and about during this pandemic, New Yorkers, what they usually are, very nice to each other and very helpful and very courteous. So I hope for us that there's only a few outliers, if any. So do we have more questions?
Well, I see a question from Julie saying, should voter intimidation or harassment be reported to the police officer first? And the answer to that is no. The police officers are not trained in the election law. So they wouldn't really be able to identify intimidation, electioneering, or any of those sorts of things. If a voter feels intimidated, they should first go to the coordinator at the poll site. And if the coordinator doesn't seem to be able to offer any help, then call one of those election protection hotline numbers, or call the Board of Elections main office directly. I think probably I should put that number in the chat, right? But the police officers are there as they would be on a street corner. They're keeping the peace, and they have stipulated responsibilities in the election law to transfer the returns of canvass at the end of the night, but they are not conversant with election law in terms of harassment or electioneering.
Kate, are they policing, keeping electioneering past the 100-foot sign, which is usually posted?
They will only do that if we have a problem. If I, the coordinator, go out and I have a problem with the candidate who I've asked to move to on the other side of a corner, and I point out that this is the 100-foot mark, and they creep back in and they won't comply, then I could bring the police officer out. But the police officer is not the first resort.
I'm going to stop this right now. We've got
Okay.
7 o'clock, which is more than I anticipated. But I have found this fascinating. I didn't know there were so many questions to ask. But I am going to say that this is the time when you're ready to, if you're ready to leave, just sign off. There, and if you'd like to stay on and talk for a little bit more, talk with Suzanne and Kate and Jennifer, please stay on and let's see what else can be said. But thank everybody for what you've done. And this was really, really great. Thank you so much.
And I'm going to stop recording now so that people feel like, if they want to speak up, they don't feel concerned about it.